Welcome to the AICPA Town Hall Series, your resource for the latest news and updates on pressing issues facing the accounting profession.
Good afternoon and welcome to the AICPA Town Hall Series. I'm Eric Auskerson, one of the hosts for today. We've got another action-packed power hour ahead for you here. We're going to be doing what we always try to do, is first bring you some of the timely and critical information that's occurring down in DC and with other related technical updates. And then we're going to talk today a lot about some strategies and capabilities related to a couple of very, very important practice areas: client advisory services and cyber security. So here's our agenda for today. We're going to kick things off with a very brief DC update. Then we're going to talk about the client advisory services area. And we've got a panel discussion, and I look forward to getting into that with you. We're then going to bring you a brief update on some technical guidance updates related to the PPP program. And then it's Cybersecurity Awareness Month, so we're going to do a deep dive on some of the top risks related to cybersecurity. So you see this, we've got a big group. So let me invite Lisa Simpson up. I'll be introducing them as they join the show. Lisa was on vacation during the last town hall, Lisa, so it's great to have you back. Hope you had a good break.
I had a great break, and that's a plug to everyone to remind you to take your time off. I was telling Eric just before we came online, I was able to catch up on what I missed by listening to the Town Hall podcast, because I'll be honest, I had my toes in the sand, and I did not catch the webcast live, but I was able to quickly and easily catch up just by downloading that podcast. So take some time off, download that podcast, and catch up when you come back or on a walk or whatever. Excellent.
Well, this week we don't have our DC team. They're busy with a lot of advocacy work in Washington, but they did provide us an update, Lisa. So let's just share that with the town hall attendees. As we all see, there's lots of negotiations going on. They're very fluid. There's drama at times. And really what this all means, based on from our DC team, is that it's looking like something is going to get done. They're beginning to compromise. What you see here on this slide are some of the top items that Senator Manchin and Senator Sinema are discussing with the White House and other leaders. Manchin's very focused on removing some of the climate element provisions in the reconciliation bill. And now we're all beginning to hear more and more about Senator Sinema's concerns related to some of the tax proposals. So there's a lot of back and forth going on right now there. And it looks like things are going to be pushed out further. We were thinking that there was a chance that this could be brought to a vote by the end of October. Now we're thinking more likely in the Thanksgiving to Christmas window. When you look at what's happening with the House, the House moderates would love to have the infrastructure bill be brought to a vote. So there's pressure there. And then the House progressives, they're doing their best to try to preserve that top line number. And that top line number for the reconciliation bill seems to be about $2 trillion. So Lisa, as you think about this, and you're talking to the firms all the time, what's your advice for them to be, sharing guidance around what's going to happen with their clients?
So I'm a political junkie. I try to keep up on what's going on morning and night. And by the time I read something at night and then get back up in the morning, it's completely changed. And I think that's something that firms can be conveying to their clients. Nothing is final until it's final. So go ahead and start doing some scenario planning. We had a guest on a town hall on September 30th that had some good insights into what some of the key tax provisions were. Obviously, we're going to keep you up to date as changes come out and as things start to gel, but there's still no language for us for you to start planning around. So just try to keep your clients in the loop, but not panicked, because nothing's final until it's final. So just keep telling them that.
Well, in a couple of weeks, we think the fog will begin to lift, and I think we will have the DC team with us on November 4th. So more to come in the next town hall related to the reconciliation bill and the infrastructure bill. What we'd like to do now is pivot and talk about a very important service line, client advisory services. So for this discussion, I'd like to bring up Eleanor Litwack, who's a partner at Gelman GRF is the name of the firm. I'll have Eleanor give a little bit more background on it, but it's a leading firm that's been very active in the client advisory services, as well as Jennifer Wilson. So welcome, Eleanor and Jennifer. Great to have you with us.
Hi, Eric. Thanks. Glad to be here.
Glad to be here, Eric. Thank you.
And you all know Jen Wilson. She's one of the leading thought leaders for the profession, leads convergence coaching, and she's played a critical role for us in this benchmarking survey that we're going to be getting into in a moment. When we talk about client advisory services, we've been talking about this for a decade. And what is client advisory services? It's business process outsourcing or virtual CFO services, providing the accounting services in the cloud to your clients. And this has become a must-have service over the past 18 months. It was a very strategic and a high growth area pre-pandemic, and now post-pandemic, this is a critical service line for firms. And what we're going to talk about is we're going to share with you some results of an important benchmarking survey that we did over the past year. And it really lays the landscape of where things stand with client advisory services, the CAS line. But we're also going to talk about this concept of CAS 2.0. Today, firms truly haven't cracked the code on how to truly deliver this service line. And we're putting together a number of resources and strategies to really help firms take this to the next level. So we're going to be talking more about moving CAS to the next level over the coming months, and we're kicking this off with today's discussion. So what I want to do now is have Jen Wilson, talk a little bit about some of the insights that we learned. This is a 30-page benchmark survey that you can access by clicking on the hyperlink. You can download these materials. There's a hyperlink here, and you can get access to this benchmark survey. So Jennifer, why don't you talk a little bit about it from a high level standpoint and get into some of these insights?
Okay, happy to do it, Eric. And I just want to say that, first of all, this is the only survey that I'm aware of that is measuring client advisory services. And so it's very important for those of us that are in the client advisory service area to have these sorts of comparatives and to start to get a sense of what the norms are and what high performing firms inside the CAS area are doing. And so I just grateful to CPA.com and the folks behind the survey to start gathering this data. It's in its second year. So this is the second round of benchmarking data, still in its infancy. The survey itself and the data gathering is in its infancy, but we're starting to learn from it. And it's exciting. And as it continues to mature, it's going to help us as practice leaders really be able to know where we should be shifting our strategies and resources along the way. So 111 CAS practices participated in the survey, and we saw a number of very important things. First of all, I'm not surprised by this, but it is noteworthy that this is a high growth service, perhaps the highest growth service that we have in public accounting, showing 20% growth. Client fee, net client fee growth year over year, and that's astounding and awesome, and not, like I said, not surprising, because we can see that just talking to CAS practice leaders. They really have all the business maybe that they can handle. Serious margins to be made, and I think that this practice, like all advisory practices, has the potential to be a high margin practice. We saw the average CAS firm or the median CAS firm with a 37% margin, but the top performers, top 25%, let's say, those folks had 47% margins, very significant in terms of service margins. And then, most expect They expect their revenues to grow in a considerable way, and 55% saw big jumps as a result specifically of services that came out of the pandemic. And that's not a surprise here to the town hall participants because the CARES Act, PPP, ERC, employee retention credits, all of those things drove significant demand.
Well, one thing when you look at these numbers, you look at the profit margins, and you see the growth. And this is I'll tell you, I talk to firms all the time, and I was speaking to one mid-sized firm recently, and they said they've actually, even in the past year, they didn't even do any marketing. You see the marketing numbers in here. The marketing numbers are very low because the demand has been so high, and also the value is extremely high, because I know there's many businesses that have been able to keep going because their firms had them set up in these state-of-the-art, cloud services. And what we've said many times is the CAS in some ways is the great equalizer. Firms of all sizes can provide this service. I want Eleanor to comment on this, but I know firms of a sole practitioner with 7 or 8 employees that provide this service, and I also know top 10 firms that provide this service, and they're all using the same platforms. So that's quite exciting, and they're also moving to this subscription pricing model, and there's a lot of value there, and there's been some interesting acquisitions that have occurred recently. So Eleanor, we're gonna get into some of the key attributes, but just when you look at this benchmarking survey and some of the points that Jennifer and I just made, why don't you add some additional insights related to those?
Sure. Well, I must say we found the survey and the results incredibly helpful, not just to have something to measure against with our peers, but areas for strategic improvement. I mean, we're all working on this, and although we're growing, there's still a lot of work to do. So this really helps sort of shift our focus to where the trends are with the growing firms. But one that really resonates with us at GRF is leading the people first culture. Mm-hmm. And it's a pretty big deal, the notion that we're nothing without our people. It's not just a talking point. We have to live and breathe this mentality. And sorry to say, but even if you're a client that's bringing in tons of money, if you're toxic to our people, you're not a good fit. We have to create that protection barrier to protect our values, our culture, and the way we respect each other. And I think that has been a big sort of growth trend for us, where we're able to be where we are today and continue on that path. And it comes also with the notion of hiring ahead and continuous hiring, which is a big part of investing in our people. We have to keep the team sane and keep them empowered. I know in traditional service lines, and GRF is a full CPA firm. Just for some context, we have 140 people. We're a top 200 firm. So we were born and raised with the mentality that with our service lines, we have busy season. And if we staff up to handle busy season for tax and audit, then we come into a space on the off cycle where maybe we're paying people to sit there and do nothing. So this is a big problem, I think, across the industry, that mentality of not having enough bandwidth at all times during the year. But on the CAS side, it occurred to us years ago that we don't really have this problem. We can break those barriers and sort of lead the path of solving that problem, because our CAS work is year round. Of course, we have patches of busyness, but luckily we're able to solve it easier than the other service lines by hiring ahead, continuously hiring, and our people feel that. I don't think anybody signed up for a career where you're working tons of hours and always weekends and nights. So they see us continuously hiring and building bandwidth. And again, it's nurturing that culture. And also big believers in training and investing in training. So it's not just the traditional CPE technical hours that we're requiring of all staff that are at our firm, but investing in soft skills and leadership skills. I know, Eric, as CPO of CPA.com, you are aware of the CAS workshop, and this is not a comment for you, it's more for my CAS peers, but we would honestly be nowhere near where we are today if we did not have the resources that came out of that workshop. And we don't just send our practice leaders, we want to send our managers, our rising stars. Everybody needs to understand the ins and outs of the business and the strategy, and not just the accounting and the debits and credits. Same goes for soft skills. We've sent many colleagues through the program at Jen's for Firm Convergence Coaching and others to build those soft skills. I am a TLP alumni, the Transformational Leadership Program. All of those are super, super important to staying on the map, and you could see the growth. I mean, now it's measured on paper, so it's really amazing to go through the survey and see that.
Well, that's exciting, and Eleanor, congrats on the success you've driven there at the firm. I know you've built up that practice. You became partner as that practice evolved, correct? So this was one that you took the leadership role for your firm related to the client accounting services. You built this into a very material line. So we couldn't agree more with the comments you made. I mean, that's in some ways I look at it, and we're just using this. You have Web 1.0 and Web 2.0. We're saying that the 1.0 of CAS was just the basic workshop, putting together the basic technology stack that you needed to deliver. And as we look to go to the next level, and you look in the survey here on some of the issues that firms are facing, there's still issues with partner buy-in. There's still issues with strategy and governance, issues around building centers of excellence. So these are things that we're gonna think further about. Lisa, so I know, as a leader of PCPS in the firms, you're always thinking about the different practice areas. So how do you see this? You've been watching this practice area for the past couple of years. So what insights and comments do you have?
I think Eleanor brought up one of the key points that we hear with firms when they're talking about exploring, developing these client advisory services, and it's that paradigm shift from going from deadline to deadline to deadline to busy season, and creating a service offering within the firm that allows for a more even distribution of work throughout the year, that helps maintain your people. It gives them a work-life balance that they're looking for, but it also lets you go so much deeper with your clients. It creates that stickiness that allows you to truly become that advisor. When I was in public accounting, client accounting was bookkeeping, and it was so after the fact. But now we have the opportunity, using technology and finding the right clients, to go so far beyond that, what just happened, to tell me what's going to happen and what should I do as the future is unfolding. How can I plan for that? So, I think a lot of firms are interested in client advisory, but they just don't know where to start. And as Eleanor was talking, the word that came to my mind was discipline. You have to have a discipline and a strategy around how you're going to build this out, how you're going to staff it, how you're going to price it, who you're going to provide services to. And I think some of these best practices are really key to getting that client advisory off the ground successfully.
That's right, Lisa. I mean, those are the critical questions. And one thing that when I'm speaking to firms, sometimes they just want to go, what's the how? What are the 2 or 3 technology solutions? That's the easiest part of the equation. There's a lot of great technology solutions that you can leverage to build out the client advisory services, but it's answering the questions of what verticals, what niches do you want to be in? How are you going to staff it? Working through the pricing model. And that's one thing, even with this benchmark survey, you'll see that the net fees per professional aren't as high as in some other areas of the practice. And the reason I think that is, and I know that is because the data still isn't perfect. We're looking at data from bookkeeping practices, and there's some billing practices that aren't where they should be. So we need to work on the pricing strategies with the firms, because over the long term, you see the profit margins. This has absolute potential to have some very, very high net fees per professional. So Jennifer, just maybe you want to comment a little bit more on kind of the business model elements of this.
Sure, Eric and Lisa, I want to pick up a little bit on what you were talking about. I'm gonna take your word, sort of dedication and commitment to focus. The word focus, and Eric, you saying picking the technology is important, but it's not the most important. To me, the place to start is who's going to lead it. That's one of the things that GRF did. Eleanor was the second partner in that practice. Dedicating a high-level leader to lead the client advisory services practice is critical. And it has to be somebody with a vision to take it forward to be this innovative advisory service and not that after the fact, backward looking bookkeeping service that it has traditionally been. Yes, Eric, the data has a mix of bookkeeping data and which is seen by clients as lower value, and it is sort of historical, and it's not that sort of forwardly thinking, proactive service that client advisory services are. But what we see in successful practices is dedicating that practice leader. We also see, as this slide illustrates, really successful CAS practices are investing in that training that Eleanor spoke of, 44 hours per person on average in the top performing firms, CAS practice firms, versus 37 hours in the median, and more. That number jumped considerably year over year from the last time we measured it for the very first survey. So that was kind of interesting. Investing in training for sure. They're also focusing on fewer technology solutions. So they're not trying to be all things to all people. They're not trying to support every general ledger that's out there or every configuration. They're definitely cloud-based, and they're definitely trying to keep it under 3 GLs. So we saw 88% of the top performing CAS practices had fewer than 3 GLs they support, which by the way means they have to say no. They have to say, no, we're not going to support all of these different products and solutions our clients are using. We will help transition our clients to these technology solutions that will make sense for them. And so, our CAS practice leaders have to be focused. And the only other thing that I'll say about them is that they really are dedicating staff. And that is something that is new and took a big jump this year in the survey as well. 56% of the top performing firms, 56% said that their staff was fully dedicated to CAS versus shared between tax and audit or other areas of the firm. So they're giving these people that full-time focus and the learning and development to be true advisors to clients, which is awesome.
Well, we're gonna continue this discussion for a couple more minutes. I mean, this is where we're going because to crack the code. We want to crack the code. One reason we want to crack the code is because non-CPA firms are growing client accounting services faster than CPA firms. And they just call them BPO practices. So there's things that we need to figure out around firm strategy and governance. So the growth rate, even the growth rate at 20% is good. It's higher. It's above 20% in some of the non-CPA firms. And some of you may have heard of a company called Pilot. This is a Jeff Bezos funded entity that is focused on building out client advisory, client accounting services for small businesses. They've got a valuation over $1 billion. This is a huge future growth area. It's value. It's core to the profession. And what we're going to do here with this CAS 2.0, this is going to be a very, very significant initiative of really putting together more of the key elements needed inside the firm on how to win and how to build a successful practice. We got a lot of questions coming in here. I love looking at the questions. One question I'll learn, what do you mean by bandwidth and things like that? But if you look here, and we want to make this digestible. And Lisa, one thing that we talk about after these town halls, we have 7,000 to 10,000 people on it. They're like, I've got more than I can handle. So what we're trying to do here is make this manageable, to look at these different elements, and for different size firms, you'll need to think differently about these different areas. But this is something that I think we're going to look back on in a few years and say, this was excellent, that we took the leadership and we continued to make sure that the CPA profession was leading in providing these business services to small to mid-sized businesses. So let me just go back to that, Eleanor. So and I want Lisa, you to come in here too, because I know we're going to be getting questions like that. Just like, people, they're just trying to keep up with the tax change that's going to occur. How do they think through this? So that bandwidth question, and as you look at this chart?
Yeah, so we're constantly evaluating what's on everybody's plate. We still have timesheets. I know some of the top growing firms actually scrapped the timesheet. But one thing that it is useful for is measuring how much time everybody is spending in any given week. So if we see that the scale is tipped and we have certain folks working 50-hour weeks, that rings an alarm for us. Either something has to come off their plate, something needs to be done more efficiently, delegation needs to happen, or oftentimes we need to hire more people. So we're very vocal about that process, and we're constantly in touch with all staff to figure out whether they have the right level of work-life balance, or as they're calling it, life-work balance, and what we need to do to solve bandwidth issues.
Eric, from my perspective on bandwidth, because we absolutely understand that practitioners have been through a rough couple of years. Now they're looking at the possibility of changes in tax legislation coming up. This isn't something that you're going to pick up on November 15 and have up and running by December 31. But I think it's important for our people in the audience to be thinking as they go through busy season, how can I be positioning myself so that once I come out of April 15, 2022, these are the changes I want to make in my practice so that I'm not running up deadline to deadline to deadline again. And so maybe that means that you identify what clients you want to continue to serve and what services you want to offer to them. So you cannot be all things to all people. And especially within our smaller firms, we know capacity is an issue. So just be thinking about that as you're going through your next busy season. What do you want it to look like when you come out on the other side?
Well, this has been a fantastic discussion. And I know we're right now in the playoffs here. We're in the second inning of the client advisory services movement. We've got a long ways to go. The technology is going to get better and better. The pre-accounting, the inputs are going to get smarter. The post-accounting, the FP&A, the business insights. So this is something that's exciting. It's rewarding. You heard from Eleanor, a lot of call outs for you here in the questions, the passion that Eleanor has for it, her staff has for it. And yes, there's questions here. Is there gonna be more training? We have a special webcast that we'll be doing in November where we'll be unpacking these four elements in greater detail, and we've got a resource slide on that. So here's the link to the CAS benchmark survey. There's these workshops, all kinds of free tools, white papers, case studies, on-demand webinars. So thank you, Eleanor. Thank you, Jen, for your leadership here. And I know both you can be a digital CPA as well. So really, really appreciate you participating in today's discussion.
Thank you, Eric.
Thanks.
So just as a reminder, Eric mentioned that we've got some hyperlinks in the slides. Please make sure you go to the resource section of the platform and download those slides to get those clickable links. So that's your helpful hint as we move on into the technical updates. We wanted to quickly just give you an update on PPP forgiveness. It's still rolling along, still making considerable progress. The latest stats are that over 90% of our 2020 PPP loans have applied for forgiveness. Forgiveness rates are still going very well. So if someone submits an application for forgiveness, 99% of it is being forgiven. So great progress there. On the 2021 loans, there's not quite as much of a hurry because you've still got 10 months after the end of a 24-week covered period to submit your application, but those are at 51% have applied. I believe that we're going to see a lot of uptick in the next 6 weeks because I think a lot of borrowers will want to try to get those 2021 loans off their books by the end of the year. So it's all still going relatively smoothly from what we hear. I saw some comments before we got started that loans are getting forgiven and they're giving shout outs to Carrie and the rest of my team for those calculators that they've been using.
It's gonna be the long tail though, Lisa. Well, this chart will be in place for for quite a while. So another one, Lisa, while you're on vacation, we had this discussion about the new quality management standards. So one thing that I want to tell the town hall attendees, right now the hundreds of questions are coming in. The feedback came in 2 weeks ago on this quality management standard. We passed that off to the ASB. And Lisa, why don't you with that feedback plus a lot of other feedback, how did the ASB respond?
Absolutely. And the ASB is very thankful to all of you for giving your feedback in the town hall, for providing comment letters or the emails. What is especially helpful is that a lot of the commentary that they got provided alternatives to some of the things that they were considering. So this is all geared toward continuing our commitment to protecting public interest. And so some of the alternatives that they were provided were very helpful in keeping that in mind. But we promised you a report out on the ASB meeting from last week, and your passion was very helpful. So what they expect to come out in the final standard, which has not been issued yet, but they have proposed changes that address some of those three top issues that Carl and Jennifer talked about on the October 7 town hall. So the first one, for self-inspection, the ASB is proposing that self-inspection continue to be permitted. There were a lot of concerns around the cost of not allowing self-inspection, and the cost-benefit analysis was a real concern. So right now, it is expected that change will be struck. So self-inspection will continue to be permitted. Cooling off period for engagement quality partner reviews is expected to continue as well. And again, all of this is still preliminary. The ASB has several other issues to consider, because this QM standard change was basically looking at three big components of QM. So they're looking at some of the other issues that have been brought up throughout the comment period. They expect that will be voted out as a final standard in the second quarter of 2022. They've again taken all the feedback about the level of changes in terms of accounting standards, auditing standards, and they are expecting that the effective date will also be pushed out to probably no earlier than 2025. We're going to have a deep dive on all of that later once that standard gets issued, but we promised you we'd let you know how the deliberations went, so we wanted to share that what I think most of you will consider to be reasonable changes. So
I mean, this is great. The chief auditor last week described the proposed quality management standard. Got that feedback from the town hall, very helpful. And then it's Q2 of 2022 that the final standard to come out at that time. And then there's 3 years, a lot of time related to the effective date. So Lisa, with that, let's move to Cybersecurity Awareness Month, and we've got and stay with me, Lisa. And I would like to bring up Ted Ross and Steve Ursula. So let me introduce Ted Ross first. Ted Ross is he's one of the leading experts related to cybersecurity. He began his career at the U.S. Air Force. He was director of network engineering at Westcorp, worked at Walmart, and then most recently VP of the Office of Advanced Technology at HP, where he built a team that really focused on built a practice on threat intelligence. And this team really reported on the overall threats that we were seeing across the U.S. and around the world. He currently is CEO of SpyCloud, and he's going to give us a great overview related to how to think about how some of our information is compromised. But we're going to kick things off first with Steve Ursula. I think many of you know Steve Ursula. He's been very active in the profession. He was running a small firm, and he's now a partner at Cherry Bekaert, a top 100 firm. He's their national leader of information assurance in cybersecurity. He's also on a number of AICPA committees. He was former chair of IMTA, the technology committee at the AICPA. So what I thought you could do, Steve, and welcome both of you, to set this discussion up is to with Ted, is to just talk about how you're seeing these different elements at Cherry Bekaert and with your clients.
Thank you, Eric, and welcome everybody to Cybersecurity Awareness Month. Certainly cybersecurity is affecting all firms of all sizes in addition to their clients. It really just doesn't discriminate. CPAs, their clients and organizations have high value data. So your personal information, financial information, health information, or confidential data, whatever it is, this information is very valuable to these adversaries, as Ted will talk to later, and how some of that information is used. But ultimately, firms, they do have a fiduciary, regulatory, and legal responsibility to safeguard that, right? To put in those best practice protections and know that these adversaries are financially motivated to gain that and come up with a variety of different campaigns to monetize that, steal the data, exfiltrate it, use it in other types of campaigns and or scams, and typically it goes on and on. So from our perspective at Cherry Bekaert, we're certainly helping organizations best navigate the preventative, the detection, the monitoring, everything that they need to, both from a assurance perspective and third-party risk assurance, as well as advisory services, depending on who's really the key stakeholder in some of those expectations. So, many of these attacks, they consist of whether it's spear phishing or phishing and implementing some malware on a network or an environment, hacking systems and email servers and web servers, any cloud resources, and attacking their endpoints. And then typically once they do that, they're getting in and they're stealing data, and they're potentially, in many cases, putting in ransomware. Which leads to not only the ransom demands and also what we would call double extortion. So if you don't pay the ransom, then they're threatening to post your information on the dark net or other public domains to force you to kind of step up and try to react accordingly and pay. Stolen credentials that are publicly available on the dark net and other forums are certainly a concern, and Ted's going to talk to that in a little bit. There's a variety of different attacks that these assailants use with stolen credentials that can lead to, whether it's business email compromise, other types of attack compromises that could facilitate either illicit wire transactions or ACH transactions or other types of electronic payments. They're using it for mobile attacks on VPNs and other remote computing technology, especially with the whole pandemic and people shifting to much more of a mobile type of computing. These endpoints, laptops, desktops, all become fair game for these attackers that give them the opportunity to potentially pivot into those environments. They're also getting very creative and going after large targets in the way of the supply chain attacks. So we've seen many attacks this year in the past, but a lot this year that have been publicized on attacking the supply chain. So vendors, customers, technology service providers, because it's a way for them to really increase their attack surface very exponentially. So as a result of all this, what we're seeing in our organizations and amongst our clients is it's forcing them to incorporate a very proactive, what we would call assumed breach mentality, meaning the prevention and the preventative controls are just not enough. The firms need to evaluate their overall maturity. They need to evaluate the resources they have, the people, process, and technology to be looking for these attack indicators and other indicators of compromise. They need to be incorporating various aspects of defense in depth. As much as we want that silver bullet, it's just not there. They have to look at layered defenses and putting in some of these best practices, cyber risks assessments in order to best allocate resources and be able to spend wisely as it pertains to the best bang for the buck. Vulnerability assessments and penetration testing, having white hat hackers or folks that are security professionals try to find the low-hanging fruit and ways in which attackers can get in. Obviously, increasing the awareness and the training around end users, making sure that they're implementing the best practices for multi-factor authentication and strong authentication. Data management, especially with the way in which things have changed and organizations, people maybe using different technology than they're supposed to, or putting data outside of the normal boundaries, increases from the standpoint of having data management issues. So from that standpoint, that's certainly a concern. And then, making sure that they have the right next generation endpoint protection and antivirus protection. Organizations should be going through mature patching processes, making sure they're updated, making sure their architectures are properly designed. And of course, based on the nature of the supply chain attacks and everything else, making sure that their third-party risk management programs are properly orchestrated. This activity needs to be something that's ongoing, becomes part of a process. Key stakeholders and leadership enforce that culture throughout the organization.
Well, Steve, I mean that you you gave a lot of information there. One thing we at the end of this section, like we always do, we're going to have different resources. We have a CPA cybersecurity checklist, which covers a lot of what Steve just covered very well for us. What I want to do now is I think this is going to be helpful. There's a lot of questions coming in about ransomware and compromising of credentials. So I think this is a perfect segue, Ted, for you to take us through these 3 slides where you talk about how this whole process works. And I think understanding this is important for the firms and for their clients. So I'll let you jump in and welcome again, Ted. And Ted's been with us before at executive roundtable events, and you're in for a real treat here, the way he's going to kind of explain to you what's happening.
Yeah, thank you, Eric, and no pressure, right? So,
Yeah.
Let's take a look at how the criminals are operating and use a timeline, to go through some of their, tactics, techniques, and procedures. And as Eric mentioned, at the end of this, we'll talk about some recommendations, some simple recommendations that everyone can use to help, combat these really bad actors. So I'm going to break the timeline into 2 different parts. There's going to be phase 1, which is the first 500 days and how they operate in the first 500 days. Typically in the first 500 days, you'll see sophisticated actors doing pretty sophisticated, techniques. And then after they're finished monetizing the information that they're using, they'll typically let it leak out into the deep and dark web. And it will end up on a forum somewhere. And that usually happens about 1.5 years after they have started their more nefarious deeds. And when that happens, and then the data is on the deep and dark web, then automated attacks take place after that, which is day 500 and onward. So before we dive into the first 500 days, I just want to make one point on this slide, and that is, if your data has been stolen by a criminal, it never goes away. Right, it's put into the underground system, and like I said, the sophisticated actors will take their turns at the beginning, doing some pretty advanced techniques, and then once they're finished, the data gets copied and multiplied and copied over and over again. So it's always out there; it never goes away. You can't have it deleted, and so knowing when your data has been compromised is really important, so that you can go in and change what has been compromised, so whatever data they have isn't effective anymore. So if we go to the next slide. So let's start with day 0. Let's say a site, like I'm going to use fantasy football as an example here. Fantasy football has been breached a few times in the past. There's not an active breach right now with fantasy football, so I'm using them as a hypothetical here. But let's just say you played fantasy football 3 years ago, and you signed up for an account, and just put a throwaway password in for your account, and then you moved on. Life continued. You forgot about your account at fantasy football. Well, let's say 2 years go by, and fantasy football is compromised by a criminal, and all the credentials that fantasy football has were spilled. They were leaked out to the underground. What happens is, as soon as the criminals gain access to that information, they put together a team. They reach out to all of their buddies in the underground, and they put together a team that will help them monetize this information. Because when they stole the information from this site, from fantasy football, in this example, it's in raw data format, right? They can't make use of it right away. So they'll find somebody who's really good at parsing the data. And raw data is very messy, so they'll find somebody who can help them make it useful and human readable so they can take action on it, right? The next thing they'll do, they'll reach out to somebody who can crack passwords, because fantasy football probably encrypted your password. Even though it was a throwaway password to you, they still encrypted it. So they'll go and find a criminal that can crack that password. Then they'll find a criminal that can use this, the credentials to access your data, and they'll find somebody who's a ransomware expert. They'll put this team together, and they'll, figure out a way to monetize this information. Typically, we're talking about cybercrime in this domain. So it, a lot of times people think that when they're setting up an account and they use a generic password or a throwaway password, that it's not a big deal because it can't come back on them. It's a simple password. It's not the password they use at their bank, right? And it's very misleading, because when a criminal gains access to even 5 characters of a password, they will automate password guessing at other sites, and just 5 characters might not work day one, but they'll figure out, hey, I can try to log into this person's bank account 3 times within 10 minutes. And if I try to log in 4 times, some threshold will be detected and an email will be sent to them. So I'm just going to try to guess their passwords 3 times, every hour or so. And I'll let that run for months or years. And eventually I'll stumble across a password that works, because they already have 5 characters of their password. I'm just assume that, if I throw in another 5 or 10 characters, I'll get their password at some point in the future. And so, throwaway passwords are not just throwaway passwords anymore. We highly recommend that when you go to any site nowadays that use a password manager, and you let the password manager create the account for you with a random string of characters as your password. So every site has a unique password. You don't even know what your password is at these sites, because your password manager knows what it is. So you only have one password to manage, and that is the password to your password manager. And so another point here is, once they figure out how to compromise somebody's credentials, access your Gmail or whatever, they'll figure out how to escalate privileges. They'll figure out how to move around in your network or on your local system. If you have backups stored on your network somewhere on spinning disk, they'll go look for those backups and they'll encrypt those backups. So we always highly recommend taking your backups offsite. If you don't have a system, a whole network, and you're just using one computer, highly recommend using one of these, right? Just back up your hard drive to an offline storage and keep it on your shelf, because if a criminal ever compromises your local machine and they're able to encrypt your hard drive, at least you have a backup. You can go buy another computer and restore from backup, versus paying a criminal a high ransom to get your data back.
Hey, Ted, I just want to jump in here because, we got, as I said, it's a live show. We got a lot of questions. The password managers, you've really triggered. People want, there's a couple of password managers you might recommend. A password manager being compromised. And then just the third question, is our passwords something, eventually that are going to go away, but just maybe, start from the password manager recommendations to them being compromised.
So in terms of recommendations, I always recommend Dashlane. Dashlane is a fantastic company and has a great product for consumers. There's also LastPass and OnePassword. There's also Password Keeper. If you're an enterprise, Password Keeper has some really great tools for enterprises. So within those 4 tools, you'll find one that you should be happy with. But give Dashlane a try first. Yeah, there's always the concern of your one password for your password manager being compromised. So you protect that one with all your might. You make it a really long string, make it a password or a passphrase, protect it with everything you have. If it is compromised, then the criminal will have access to all of your sites. And so you just have to keep that in mind. The risk of that happening, though, is pretty slim nowadays. The risk of a criminal compromising your credentials from a third-party breach and accessing your other sites without you knowing it is very high at this point. So So it's kind of a, you weigh your risks, and I would definitely recommend going with a password manager versus reusing passwords across hundreds of different sites that people use today. Does that make sense?
That makes sense. So we'll keep going. The other tip, we have some humor out there. He said one other thing is don't participate in fantasy football, but that was keep so here, why don't kind of going on. We're going to ransomware. We'll bring Steve back into it.
Good deal. So along those lines, in the first 500 days, they're not just guessing your password. They also access your PII. If you signed up for fantasy football and you provided information about yourself, that information most likely leaked. If you answered some secret questions so that you could recover your password at their site, that information probably also spilled out. And so criminals will use this PII in the first 500 days to set up real well-crafted phishing campaigns and send you an email so that you'll click on a link so that you'll infect yourself with malware or a keylogger, right? So it goes beyond just credentials. So yeah, I won't harp on it too much, but phishing and malware and compromised credentials, those are the top attack vectors for ransomware actors to actually get to your data and encrypt your data. So these are really the top concerns. And Steve had it laid out, and that he had it listed by order. And it was nice to see that phishing and malware and compromised credentials were at the top of the list, because those are really the top concerns at this point. So after day 500, after the criminals are finished, with their sophisticated techniques, they will let the data leak out. And when it's on the deep and dark web, on a forum somewhere, literally thousands of criminals will have access to the data. So they'll download your credentials and they'll put them in tools like credential stuffing tools and password spray tools, and they'll just let their tools go crazy. So if you ever see an email from your bank or from Netflix or one of your other streaming services to tell you that somebody has tried to log into your account and exceeded your brute force threshold, take it seriously. Go to that account and make sure that you're using a unique long password. Make sure you have multi-factor enabled, and so on. One thing I wanted to mention is if you fall victim to one of these phishing attempts and you click on a link and you infect yourself on accident, I mean, nobody does it on purpose. The criminal has access to every keystroke that you make. They also have access to all the cookies that are stored on your machine. And this is one of those things that, everybody who uses multi-factor thinks that they're completely secured, and they're not. Because if you have malware on your machine and your cookies leak out, a criminal can take over your session to your bank without ever having to log in. They don't need your credentials at that point. They can just take over your session using your cookie. And so another recommendation, which again, I'll summarize at the end of this, is to, clear out your cookies as often as possible. And so if you're following those recommendations using a password manager and things like that, and you don't necessarily need to worry so much about what happens after day 500, because those automated tools, even if you have multi-factor enabled, the automated tools are not going to try to defeat multi-factor. All the attempts to defeat multi-factor, that happens earlier in the timeline when the sophisticated criminals, when there's a human behind a keyboard that's targeting you, right? And they will be the types of actors that will try to defeat multi-factor.
Well, I mean, Ted, I just want to say you have boiled us down. I mean, this is Cybersecurity Month. I think this was a fantastic session here, because it's manageable. I mean, it's scary with when you talk about how these criminals are operating, but there are just the 3 or 4 basic things that the firms can do and their clients can do. And we're going to close this session with some really good cybersecurity checklists that you can leverage. And this is a great practice area, but I want you to, let's maybe get Steve in here for a second. Steve, just to kind of comment on, what you've just heard from Ted, these different techniques that you can leverage. And as we've got so many questions coming in. This has really piqued a lot of interest, and the interest around the password manager. The keystroking was actually a question that you just answered. So Steve, what would you like to kind of add to, since you know this audience so well?
Yeah, I mean, I think overall, making sure that you're looking at kind of all of those key high risk elements of the attack. So from your firm's perspective, regardless of size, making sure that you're protecting your email, you're using what's called proxies that are intercepting traffic coming in and out of the organization to make sure that that traffic is protected and you're not going down the wrong avenues, so to speak. Making sure you're using the right strong encryption and authentication protocols. It's also really important that your endpoints are controlled and that they're protected. And we get back to this, next generation, so to speak, what we call EDR, or endpoint detection and response. It's not just good enough to be in the preventative stance, in the preventative mode. A vast majority of these attacks are happening and they're undetected. These attackers are doing what's called live off the land. So they know what the endpoints protection are looking for. They know what those indicators of compromise are looking for. So they're using built-in tools and they're using ways in which they're navigating the network with utilities that typical normal administrators would use. The other thing I think that's important when thinking about that is, Ted brought up the password manager, right? And sometimes these breaches don't tell you exactly where the data came from, depending on how much it's buried into. So, if you're using a password manager and the actual hash or the password gets cracked, you can take that, search your password manager, and guess what? You just found out what site got breached. So there are inherent ways of finding things out that do provide you value. But I'll go back to just making sure that you're constantly keeping an eye on your networks. You're constantly keeping an eye on the environment. You're using the right technologies. Unfortunately, many organizations, they can get hit with exactly what we're talking about. And then it's not till after the fact they're putting in all of the right prevention and detection, because as they're building and rebuilding their networks from the attack, they want to make sure that they're not re-infiltrated or re-compromised. We talk about backups, we talk about resiliency, really, really important. But the attackers could be on the network for 1 month, 2 months, 3 months. They could be planting things in the network that are getting included in your backups. They could be contaminating your backups. We've seen situations where people think they have backups because they're acting the way they would check, but they never tested them. So when it comes back, the backups have actually been corrupted and modified by the attacker. So it's really, truly important that you take this serious. You're actually running these playbooks and making sure that you're prepared to respond, because quite frankly, the time is not on your side, right? Breach notification requirements, dealing and potentially talking to the adversaries to make sure that you have things under control, making sure that you're in a situation to best respond. It's all things that you need to practice. I mean, speaking of fantasy football or any other sport, when it comes game time, you've had hundreds of hours of practicing in order to perform. You need to practice a lot of these security, proactive procedures to be best suited to defend and respond.
Steve, a couple of things. I'm sorry, Eric. I've talked with firms who have gone through the pain of being hacked or being breached, and so Steve's mentioned it a couple of times. Even if you are a small firm and you think you're not attractive to a criminal, you have a lot of great data that they really want. So don't ignore this. If you're just a one person or a very small shop, they're going to come after you as well. Keep your patches up to date. Always download those patches, and think about getting cybersecurity insurance, because what can happen is if you do find out that you've been breached, that cybersecurity insurance is going to allow you to get some really good support behind the forensic investigation that's going to come next, the costs of alerting your clients if you need to do that. So a lot more to unpack here.
That's right. So this has been a great session. One thing that I'd recommend, you've got these slides, you've got your potentially IT consultants that are supporting you. You can leverage these slides to have these discussions with them, with your clients, and also the insurance tip's a great one. So thanks, Ted. Thanks, Steve. Lisa and I now we're gonna move into just covering the resources, because we had open forum throughout today's session. So once again, you've got access to these town hall series. Even today's session, we've covered a lot of information, and I think at times you might want to go back and watch it again. Lisa watched it on vacation, so take advantage of these archives. podcast, on the AICPA TV. They all work well. So Lisa, we really are in the final minute here. So I know we've got this upcoming mental health focused webinar, October 28th. You can register by this clickable link. We also have another opportunity here. Lisa, you want to comment on this?
Yeah, we've talked a lot in the past about talent shortages and the war for talent. So PCPS offers an opportunity to help you recruit a more diverse workforce through this win-win-win program. So just something for you to look at before November 1.
And then we also have what we talked about earlier. This is a webinar, free webinar, November 17th, 1 hour on digging in. And there was a lot of questions here about the CAS 2.0 strategy and all more training. There's a great opportunity for you to take advantage to learn more about how to build out a winning CAS practice. So here we're going to do summary slides. We don't have time today to kind of get too much into the summary slide, but we want to leave you every town hall with a summary slide. One thing I will say we're going to do in our newsletter is the town hall newsletter, which will come out after today's town hall, is to highlight some of those recommendations about password managers. A lot of questions came in on that. So thanks for your time today. Our next town hall will be November 4th. We greatly appreciate being with you. This was a power hour covering the latest from DC, the CAS practice, Cybersecurity Month. So thanks for your attention. Thanks for your questions, Lisa. It's great being with you today as well.
Happy to be back.
Thank you for your participation. You can now subscribe to the AICPA Town Hall series on your favorite podcast platform, as well as watch archives on YouTube and AICPA TV. Tune in for live broadcasts Thursdays at 3 p.m. Eastern Time.